The alarm bell screamed through the Galactic Council chambers as an emergency. Transmission burst through their communication systems. Vexera, one of the senior council members, rushed to the main display screen with her heart pounding. What she saw made her blood freeze in terror. The beautiful blue and green world of Kalani was changing before her eyes. Massive crystal formations were spreading across the planet's surface like a deadly infection. Entire forests that had stood for thousands of years were now nothing but glittering stone. Cities that once bustled with millions of peaceful Kalani people had become silent, crystal graveyards. The holographic images showed the horrifying speed of this transformation. Buildings, trees, even the Kalani people themselves were being turned into lifeless mineral sculptures. It wasn't just death, it was something far worse. The plague was rewriting the very essence of life itself, turning everything organic into cold, dead crystal. Meanwhile, millions of miles away, in the darkness of space, Captain Jinho was having what he thought would be a boring patrol shift aboard the human starship Aurora. The 35-year-old officer was reviewing routine reports when his communications officer, Minji, suddenly sat up straight at her station. "Captain, we're receiving an encrypted transmission," Minji called out, her fingers dancing across the control panel. "It's not from any human colony or ship. The language patterns are completely alien." Jinho moved to her station, watching as strange symbols flashed across the screen. Minji's translation software worked overtime, slowly converting the alien words into human language. As the message became clear, both officers felt a chill run down their spines. "Help us. Everything is turning to stone. Our world is dying. Please, anyone who receives this message, we are the Kalani of the fourth spiral arm. Our civilization is ending. Everything we touch becomes crystal. Our children, our homes, our forests, all becoming lifeless rock. We have tried everything. Our scientists cannot stop it. If there is anyone out there who can help, please come quickly. We may only have days left." The message repeated several times, each transmission weaker than the last, as if the broadcasting equipment itself was being affected by whatever was destroying their world. Dr. Hyunwoo, the ship's expert on alien biology, arrived at the communications station within minutes of being called. The tall, serious scientist studied the data that came with the message: microscopic images, genetic sequences, and environmental readings from the Kalani homeworld. What he discovered made no sense according to everything. Humans knew about biology and physics. The crystalline plague wasn't just killing living things, it was completely rewriting their molecular structure. Plants, animals, even bacteria were being transformed into perfect crystal formations, while somehow maintaining their original shapes. "This is impossible," Hyunwoo muttered, adjusting his glasses as he stared at the data. "Living tissue doesn't just turn into minerals like this. There has to be some kind of catalyst, some kind of trigger that we're not seeing." The more he studied the information, the more worried he became. If this plague could spread to other worlds, it could potentially wipe out all organic life in the galaxy. But what puzzled him most was how rapidly it was spreading, and how it seemed to target only living matter while leaving artificial structures mostly untouched. "Captain," Ginho made a decision that would change everything. Instead of forwarding the message to Earth Command and waiting for orders, he decided to investigate personally. The Aurora changed course immediately, heading toward the dying Kalani homeworld at maximum speed. Vexera stood before the massive curved table where the Galactic Council's most powerful members sat in stunned silence. The holographic displays around them still showed the dying Kalani world, with crystal formations spreading like cancer across entire continents. She took a deep breath and spoke the words that would horrify every civilized being in the room. "We need to contact the humans." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Several council members jumped from their seats, while others began shouting in various alien languages. The Zephyrian representative actually fainted, crashing to the floor with a loud thud. Even the normally calm Nexari delegate started shaking uncontrollably. "Have you lost your mind?" screamed Counselor Kekstar, his tentacles writhing in agitation. Those monsters from Terra are barely more than wild animals. They're Deathworlders being so savage they actually choose to live on planets that would kill us in seconds. The debate that followed was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever experienced. For 6 hours straight, representatives argued, pleaded, and threatened each other while the Kalani continued dying in real time on their screens. The stories about humans were legendary throughout the galaxy, told in whispers and shared as cautionary tales. These creatures came from a planet so hostile that it was classified as a Class 12 death world, a rating so extreme that most civilized species believed such worlds couldn't possibly support intelligent life. "They drink poison for entertainment," shouted the R'Lani ambassador, waving all 4 of his arms dramatically. "I've seen the reports. They consume something called alcohol that would shut down our nervous systems instantly, and they laugh while doing it." "That's nothing," added another council member. "They expose themselves to their star's radiation without protection. They call it sunbathing and consider it relaxing. The same radiation levels that would cook our flesh in minutes." The horror stories continued to pour out. Humans ate plants that contained natural toxins. They exercised until their bodies produced acid that would burn through most alien skin. They lived in atmospheric conditions with oxygen levels that would cause most species to hallucinate and die. Most terrifying of all, they carried billions of bacteria and viruses in their bodies without any negative effects. "They're walking biological weapons," whispered the usually brave Corvani general. "Their breath alone contains enough microorganisms to wipe out entire colonies of civilized beings." But Dexera stood firm against the tsunami of objections. She pointed to the screens, showing the Kalani homeworld, where another major city had just finished its transformation into lifeless crystal. "Look at this," she shouted above the chaos. "Our best scientists can't even get close enough to study the plague without dying. Our most advanced medical technology is useless. We've tried everything our civilizations know, and we're failing completely. The Kalani will be extinct in less than 72 hours. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Every species represented in the council had tried to help. The brilliant Altorian biochemists had sent their finest minds. The technologically advanced Nexari had deployed their most sophisticated equipment. The mystical Etherian healers had attempted their ancient remedies. Nothing worked. If anything, their interventions seemed to make the plague spread faster. "These humans," Thexera continued, her voice softer now, "they might be savage and unpredictable, but they survive things that kill everyone else. They live with dangers that we can't even imagine. Maybe that's exactly what we need right now." The final vote came down to Counselor Vrim, an ancient being who had served on the council for over 3 centuries. His species was known for their wisdom and careful decision-making. Everyone held their breath as he slowly raised his voting appendage. "I vote yes," he said quietly. "May the universe forgive us for what we're about to unleash, but desperate times required desperate measures." The transmission was sent immediately, before anyone could change their minds. For the first time in galactic history, the civilized species of the galaxy were officially reaching out to the terrifying Deathworlders of Terra, hoping that monsters might somehow become their salvation. The Aurora's briefing room filled with the soft chatter of 20 crew members as they settled into their seats. Captain Jinho stood at the front, his face serious as he activated the main display screen. What came next would change everything they thought they knew about life in the universe. "What you're about to hear," Jinho began, "is the first official communication we've ever received from what appears to be a galactic government, and they're asking for our help." The alien message began to play, translated into Korean by the ship's computer systems, but even with translation, Many concepts were completely foreign to human understanding. The crew listened with growing amazement, as they learned about beings so delicate that they lived their entire lives in completely sterile environments. "Wait, let me get this straight," interrupted Lieutenant Soyang, the ship's security chief. The tough 28-year-old woman had seen combat on 3 different worlds, but this was confusing even for her. "They're afraid of bacteria, the tiny organisms that live inside all of us." Dr. Hyenwu nodded slowly, his scientific mind racing with possibilities. According to this message, these aliens consider any form of microbial life to be extremely dangerous. They seem to live in environments that are completely sterile. No bacteria, no viruses, nothing. Engineer Dong Yoon, a practical man who preferred dealing with machines rather than biology, raised his hand. "How is that even possible? Don't they need gut bacteria to digest food? What about the microorganisms that help plants grow in soil? That's what makes this so fascinating," Hunwoo replied, pulling up biological data on his tablet. "It seems like these Kalani and other alien species evolved completely differently from us. They developed without the complex ecosystem of microorganisms that humans depend on to survive." The crew began to understand just how different they were from the rest of the galaxy. While humans lived in harmony with billions of tiny organisms, carrying them everywhere and depending on them for basic bodily functions, these aliens viewed such things as deadly contamination. "So when they say they're afraid of us," said Communications Officer Minji quietly, "they literally mean our bodies are like walking biological weapons to them." "Exactly," confirmed Dr. Hyunwoo. "Our breath, our skin, even our clothes carry microorganisms that could potentially devastate their sterile environments. To them, we probably seem like creatures made of pure poison." Lieutenant Soyang crossed her arms, her military training making her suspicious. "This could be a trap. Maybe they want to study us, find our weaknesses. Why would they suddenly reach out to us if we're so dangerous to them?" "Because they're desperate," Captain Jinho replied, replaying parts of the message. "Their entire civilization is dying from something they can't understand or control. They've tried everything their science knows, and nothing works. We might be terrifying to them, but we're also their last hope." Engineer Dong Yoon was already at his station, fingers flying over the navigation controls. "I'm calculating the fastest route to their system. If we push the engines to maximum capacity, we can reach them in 18 hours. The room buzzed with nervous energy as the crew realized what they were about to attempt. This wasn't just a rescue mission, it was first contact with an entire galactic civilization that viewed humans as monsters from a death world. "Listen carefully," Captain Jinho addressed his crew. "We're about to enter a situation where our very existence might be seen as an act of war. These beings are so different from us that they probably can't imagine how we stay alive on Earth. They live in perfect, clean environments, while we thrive in chaos." Dr. Hunwoo began preparing medical protocols, trying to figure out how to interact with beings who might die from exposure to normal human bacteria. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew prepared for a diplomatic mission unlike anything in human history. As the Aurora jumped faster than light speed, racing toward the dying Kalani homeworld, nobody knew they were about to become humanity's first ambassadors to a galaxy that feared them. The Aurora dropped out of hyperspace, and the crew pressed against the viewing ports to get their first look at the Kalani homeworld. What they saw took their breath away, but not in a good way. The planet looked like someone had taken a beautiful blue and green world and slowly covered it with glittering death. Massive crystal spires jutted up from what used to be dense forests. Where major cities once stood, there were now perfect geometric formations that sparkled in the sunlight like giant diamonds. It was strangely beautiful and absolutely terrifying at the same time. "My God," whispered Communications Officer Minji as she stared at the planet. "It looks like the entire world is turning into one huge crystal sculpture." The Kalani ships that approached them were unlike anything the humans had ever seen. They moved slowly and carefully, as if the pilots were afraid of damaging something precious. When the aliens finally made contact, their voices came through the communication system filtered through so many layers of protection that they sounded like they were speaking from inside a tomb. "Human vessel," came the nervous alien voice. "We have prepared a sterile docking bay for your arrival. Please understand that we must take extreme precautions. Your biological signatures are concerning to us." Captain Jinho tried not to laugh. These aliens were treating his crew like they were made of pure acid. "We understand your concerns. We'll follow your safety protocols." The docking process took over an hour, because the Kalani insisted on spraying the Aurora with multiple layers of sterilization chemicals. Dr. Hyunwoo watched through the porthole as robotic arms doused their ship with substances that would probably kill most Earth bacteria instantly. When they finally disembarked, the sight that greeted them was both hilarious and sad. A group of Kalani scientists stood waiting, but they looked more like they were preparing to handle radioactive waste than meet fellow intelligent beings. Each alien wore a thick environmental suit with multiple air filters, and they stayed at least 20 feet away from the humans at all times. "Welcome to our world," said the lead Kalani scientist, his voice muffled by his protective gear. "I am Chief Researcher Velt. We appreciate your willingness to help, despite the obvious dangers this poses to both our species." Dr. Hunu stepped forward, and immediately all the aliens took several steps back. "We'd like to examine some samples of the crystalline plague. Can you show us the affected areas?" The Kalani scientists looked at each other nervously. "The contaminated zones are extremely dangerous. We can only approach them using remote-controlled equipment. Even with our protective suits, exposure for more than a few minutes could be fatal. What happened next would become legendary in galactic history." Dr. Hunwoo calmly walked over to a section of crystallized plant matter, knelt down, and picked up a chunk with his bare hands. The Kalani scientists screamed and ran backwards, convinced they were witnessing a human committing suicide. "It's okay," Hyunwoo called out cheerfully, turning the crystal formation over in his palm like he was examining an interesting rock. "This stuff isn't dangerous to us. Actually, it's quite fascinating from a molecular standpoint." Specialist Yoonji, the ship's environmental expert, had brought her atmospheric analysis equipment. While the Kalani watched in horror, she removed her helmet and took a deep breath of the contaminated air that they claimed would kill any living being in minutes. "Air quality is actually pretty good here," she announced, checking her readings. "Oxygen levels are a bit high for human comfort, but nothing we can't handle. The crystalline particles in the atmosphere are interesting. They seem to be inert once they're separated from the main formation." The aliens couldn't believe what they were seeing. These humans were walking around in conditions that would kill Kalani in seconds, handling deadly plague material like it was harmless dirt, and breathing poisoned air like it was fresh mountain breeze. Engineer Dong Yoon joined them, taking readings with his own equipment. The energy patterns from these crystals are actually quite stable. Whatever caused this transformation has stopped being active. These formations are basically just really pretty rocks now. Chief Researcher Valthor's voice was shaking as he spoke through his suit's communication system. How are you still alive? That material should have killed you instantly. The air you're breathing contains crystalline particles that destroyed our most advanced filtration systems." Dr. Hunwoo smiled and held up the crystal sample. "I think we might have found your problem. You've been treating this like it's some kind of super weapon, but to us, it's just another environmental challenge." The emergency meeting in the Kalani government chamber was unlike anything in their species' history. High-ranking officials sat in a perfect circle, each encased in their protective environmental suits, while the human team stood in the center like they were surrounded by terrified astronauts. Dr. Hanwoo cleared his throat and began explaining his findings. "After studying your crystalline plague for the past 6 hours, I believe I understand what's happening. This isn't actually a disease in the traditional sense. It's more like a sterile chemical reaction that feeds on perfectly clean environments. The Kalani Prime Minister Kelvana leaned forward in her chair. Even through her suit's filters, her voice carried obvious confusion. I don't understand. How can sterility be the problem? We've always believed that cleanliness prevents contamination. That's exactly the issue, Yunwoo replied, pulling out a small sample container. Your world is too clean. This crystalline formation spreads because there's nothing to compete with it, nothing to disrupt its molecular patterns. On Earth, we have billions of microorganisms that would immediately start breaking down these crystal structures. The reaction in the room was immediate and explosive. Several officials actually fell out of their chairs, while others began backing toward the exits. The idea of deliberately introducing Earth bacteria into their world was like suggesting they set off nuclear bombs in their cities. You want to poison our entire planet? Screamed the Minister of Health, his voice cracking with panic. Those microorganisms you carry would kill every living thing on our world. Captain Jinho stepped forward, trying to calm the situation. I understand your fear, but you have to trust us. We've dealt with similar problems on dozens of worlds. Sometimes the cure looks worse than the disease. Medical Officer Young Ho chose that moment to open his field kit and begin preparing what he considered basic medical supplies. The Kalani watched in absolute terror as he casually handled bottles and instruments that, to them, looked like torture devices from their worst nightmares. This is standard hydrogen peroxide, Young Ho explained cheerfully, holding up a clear bottle. We use it to clean minor cuts. It's perfectly safe for humans. The alien scrambled to the far side of the room as if he were holding a vial of deadly poison. And this, he continued, completely oblivious to their panic, is just rubbing alcohol. Again, we use it for basic first aid. 3 more Kalani officials fainted as he opened the bottle, releasing vapors that would indeed be toxic to their species. Dr. Hyun-woo tried to explain his theory, while the chaos continued around him. The crystalline plague is essentially a runaway sterilization process. It keeps spreading because there's nothing in your environment to stop it. But if we introduce controlled amounts of Earth-based microorganisms, they'll compete with the crystal formation for resources. You're talking about biological warfare, shouted the defense minister. Those bacteria will reproduce exponentially. They'll consume everything organic on our planet. Actually, no, Hyun-woo replied patiently. Earth bacteria are incredibly competitive with each other. They'll establish a natural balance that will prevent any single organism from taking over. It's called an ecosystem, something your world has never had. Engineer Dong-yoon had been quietly running calculations on his tablet. The beauty of this solution is that it's self-regulating. Once the bacterial colonies establish themselves, they'll naturally limit each other's growth, while simultaneously breaking down the crystal formations. The humans began setting up their equipment while the Kalani leadership watched from behind additional protective barriers they'd hastily erected. What the aliens saw next would haunt their dreams for years to come. Specialist Yunji opened containers of what she called garden soil dirt from Earth that contained millions of microorganisms per gram. To her, it smelled like home. To the Kalani, it was like opening a container of pure death. This soil contains everything we need, she explained happily, breathing in the earthy scent. Bacteria, fungi, tiny insects, organic compounds, basically a complete ecosystem in a handful of dirt. The Prime Minister's voice was barely a whisper. You live with all of those organisms inside your bodies. Of course, replied Dr. Hyun-woo. We couldn't survive without them. They help us digest food, fight off harmful infections, and maintain our immune systems. We're not just one organism, we're entire walking ecosystems. The revelation that humans were essentially living planets covered in billions of microorganisms was too much for several Kalani officials, who had to be carried out of the room unconscious. The decision to proceed with the human treatment plan came after 18 hours of desperate debate among the colony leadership, with their world dying faster each hour, and entire cities now transformed into lifeless crystal sculptures. They had no choice but to trust these terrifying creatures from the death world called Dearth. Technician Jiwan whistled cheerfully as she assembled her atmospheric processing equipment in what used to be the colony capital's Central Park. The area was now a forest of beautiful crystal trees that sparkled like diamonds in the afternoon sun, but held no life whatsoever. "Okay, this should do it," she announced, connecting the final tubes to her machine. "We're going to start pumping regular Earth atmosphere into this zone. Fair warning, it's going to smell pretty funky to you guys." The colony observers stood behind a hastily constructed barrier wall, wearing the most advanced protective suits their technology could produce. Even with all that protection, they looked like they were preparing to witness the end of their world. "Are you absolutely certain this won't kill everything on our planet?" asked Chief Researcher Velther, for the 100th time, his voice shaking. Through his suit's communication system, Dr. Hunawu looked up from his sample containers. Completely relaxed, despite working in conditions the aliens considered utterly lethal. "I promise you, this is going to work. We're essentially teaching your world how to have a proper ecosystem." When Jiwan activated her equipment, the reaction from the colony was immediate and dramatic. The machine began releasing air that, to human noses, smelled like a pleasant mixture of forest floor and ocean breeze. To the aliens, it was like someone had opened the gates of hell itself. "I can detect over 40,000 different microorganisms in that air sample," screamed the colony Minister of Health, frantically checking his readings. "The contamination levels are off our charts." "That's actually pretty clean by Earth standards," replied Nurse Hannah casually, as she prepared her bacterial cultures. "You should smell the air after it rains in Seoul. Now that's what I call rich and full of life." The humans worked with the casual efficiency of people performing routine tasks. Dr. Hyun Woo carefully applied drops of bacterial solution to crystallized areas, while Nurse Hannah monitored the immediate reactions. They moved freely through the contaminated zone, breathing the poisoned air like it was the most natural thing in the world. What happened next fascinated the human team and horrified the watching aliens. Where the Earth bacteria made contact with the crystal formations, tiny fractures began to appear. The perfect, sterile crystal structures started showing signs of breakdown as millions of microscopic organisms began competing for resources. "Look at that," exclaimed Dr. Heinwu excitedly, pointing to a crystallized tree trunk. "The bacteria are actually eating away at the mineral matrix. They're converting the crystal back into organic compounds they can use for energy." Giwan adjusted her atmospheric processor, increasing the concentration of Earth-based microorganisms in the air. "I'm reading massive bacterial reproduction rates. These little guys are having a party, plenty of food, and no competition." The colony scientists watched their instruments in growing panic as their readings showed exactly what they feared most. Their sterile, perfect world was being deliberately contaminated with billions of alien life forms. "The air quality has dropped to Class 7 toxicity," reported one technician. "No colony could survive in those conditions for more than 30 seconds. "But look at the crystal degradation rates," Nurse Hannah pointed out, checking her own readings. "We're seeing a 20% reduction in crystal density just in the first hour. This is working exactly as we predicted. By the end of the first day, the treatment zone had transformed into something that looked like organized chaos to alien eyes. Where once there had been perfect crystal formations, now there were areas of competing bacterial colonies, each one carving out its own territory and breaking down the lifeless mineral structures. The smell was overwhelming to the colony, a rich, complex mixture of organic compounds that their species had never experienced. To the humans, it smelled like life returning to a dead world. "I know this looks terrifying to you," Captain Jinho told the Kalani leadership through the communication system, but what you're seeing is how life is supposed to work. It's messy, it's competitive, and it's absolutely beautiful. The aliens weren't convinced, but they couldn't argue with the results. For the first time since the plague began, the crystal formations were actually shrinking instead of growing. 3 days after the treatment began, the impossible was happening before everyone's eyes. The crystal formations that had seemed eternal and unstoppable were actually falling apart. What started as tiny cracks had grown into massive fractures, running through entire crystallized forests. Dr. Hein Wu stood in the middle of what used to be a dead crystal garden, watching as chunks of mineral structure crashed to the ground around him. Where each piece fell, small patches of brown earth soil were already forming as billions of microorganisms broke down the crystal into usable nutrients. "This is incredible," he called out to his team, completely unbothered by the collapsing crystal structures that would have terrified any other species. The bacterial colonies are not just destroying the plague, they're actually rebuilding the soil chemistry from scratch. Lieutenant Soyang had taken on the challenging task of working with Kalani military forces who still viewed the treatment zones as extremely dangerous battlefields. The aliens approached in heavily armored vehicles, moving slowly and carefully through areas where humans walked casually in regular clothes. "Kalani command, this is Lieutenant Soyang," she spoke into her communicator while standing knee-deep in what the aliens called lethal contamination. "The zone is completely safe for organic life now. The bacterial ecosystem has stabilized, and crystal formation has stopped entirely in this sector." The response from the Kalani commander was filled with static and disbelief. "Human Lieutenant, our readings show atmospheric toxicity levels that should kill any living being in minutes. How are you still alive?" Soyang laughed, breathing deeply of the air that smelled like a earth forest after rain. "Commander, this air is cleaner than what we breathe in most of our cities back home. Your instruments are measuring life, not toxicity." Meanwhile, Communications Officer Minji had set up a direct transmission link to the Galactic Council chambers. Representatives from dozens of species watched in stunned silence as her camera showed humans working comfortably in conditions they considered apocalyptic. "Galactic Council, this is Officer Mingi reporting from the Kalani homeworld," she announced, panning her camera across a landscape that was transforming before their eyes. "What you're seeing is the systematic restoration of natural ecosystem balance using Earth-based microorganisms." The alien voices that responded through her communication system were filled with confusion and amazement. "Officer Minji," came the voice of Counselor Vexra, "our sensors indicate that you're standing in an environment with over 1 million different microorganism species per cubic meter of air. How is this not killing you?" "Because we're not fighting against life," Minji replied, kneeling down to show the camera a handful of rich, dark soil that was forming where crystal used to be. "We're part of it. Every breath I take brings in thousands of these organisms, and they help keep me healthy." Engineer Dong Yun had been monitoring the planetary changes from orbit, and his reports were reshaping how the galaxy understood the concept of habitability. "The atmospheric changes are spreading faster than we predicted," he reported to both human and alien command centers. "Areas we treated 3 days ago are now showing signs of plant growth. Actual green plants are growing in soil that didn't exist a week ago." The Kalani, who witnessed this transformation firsthand, were experiencing something their species had never encountered before: the sight of chaotic, uncontrolled life thriving without any sterile management systems. Specialist Yunji discovered something that excited the human team even more. "The original Kalani plant life is starting to grow back," she announced, pointing to tiny green shoots emerging from the newly formed soil. "The crystal plague didn't actually destroy the genetic material, it just locked it away. Now that we have a proper ecosystem, life is returning naturally." What amazed the watching galaxy most was how casual the humans were about the entire process. While alien scientists required massive protection just to observe from a distance, the human team treated the restoration like routine maintenance work. The beautiful thing about Earth ecosystems, Dr. Heinwu explained to the Galactic Council during one of Minji's transmissions, is that they're self-regulating. We don't have to manage every detail. We just need to provide the right conditions and let life figure out the rest. By the end of the week, satellite images showed large green patches spreading across the Kalani homeworld where crystal formations had once dominated. The impossible had become routine under human guidance, and the galaxy was beginning to understand that. What they feared as contamination was actually the foundation of all healthy life. The tide had truly turned, and it was Earth's chaotic, beautiful, competitive ecosystem that had saved an entire world. The news of humanity's success on the Kalani homeworld spread through galactic communication networks faster than anyone expected. Within hours of Communications Officer Minji's final report showing green plants growing in previously crystallized soil, the Aurora's communication array began lighting up like a Christmas tree. Captain Jinho was reviewing the mission reports when his communication officer rushed onto the bridge, her face flushed with excitement and confusion. "Captain, you need to see this," Minji announced, pulling up the incoming transmission logs on the main screen. "We're receiving emergency requests from 17 different star systems. All of them are asking for human assistance with what they're calling impossible survival scenarios." The first message that played made the entire bridge crew stop what they were doing. It came from the Nexari Federation, a species known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology and logical thinking. "Human vessel Aurora. This is Supreme Commander Zekskal of the Nexari Third Fleet. We have monitored your success on the Kalani world with great interest. We desperately require assistance with our mining colony on Piros 4. The planet's volcanic activity has increased beyond all survivable parameters. Our people cannot work in temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius, but the planetary surface now averages 180 degrees. We have 50,000 colonists trapped with no way to evacuate them safely." Dr. Hanwu looked up from his medical readings, genuinely confused. "They can't survive in 40-degree heat. That's barely warm enough for a decent bath. How do they even function as a technological species?" Lieutenant Soyang was already laughing. 180 degrees Celsius. That's not even hot enough to boil water completely. My grandmother works in her garden when it's hotter than that. The messages kept coming, each one describing crises that seemed almost comically manageable to human standards. The Quillic Confederacy was facing what they called apocalyptic radiation storms that measured levels barely higher than what humans experienced during routine medical human rescuers, pleaded the Quillac message. Our homeworld is being bombarded with radiation that measures 50 millisieverts per hour. Our entire population is hiding in underground bunkers, but our food supplies are running out. We cannot survive on the surface for more than minutes without suffering fatal radiation poisoning. Engineer Dong Yun nearly choked on his coffee. 50 millisieverts per hour. That's less radiation than our reactor technicians work with every day. Hell, that's less than what people get flying in airplanes back on Earth. The communication requests became increasingly desperate and, from a human perspective, increasingly absurd. The Etherian collective needed help with a toxic atmosphere crisis, where oxygen levels had risen to 25%, something humans would consider wonderfully fresh air. The Corvani Empire was facing an acidic death zone where the pH levels had dropped to 6.5, barely acidic enough to be considered mild lemon juice. Captain Jinho sat in his command chair, watching the flood of emergency requests pile up on his screens. Each alien species was facing what they considered civilization-ending disasters. But to his crew, these were just Tuesday afternoon problems. "Minji, respond to all these requests," he ordered. "Tell them we're currently committed to the Kalani restoration project. but we'll help as soon as we can, and ask them to send detailed environmental data so we can prepare properly." What happened next surprised even the humans, as word spread that the notorious Deathworlders were actually willing to help other species. The requests multiplied exponentially. Within 24 hours, they had received over 200 emergency calls from across the galaxy. "Captain," reported Engineer Dong-Yoon, frantically working at his navigation console, "I'm trying to plot efficient routes to all these crisis zones, but there are too many. We could spend the next 10 years just responding to emergency calls." Dr. Hunwoo was studying the environmental data from dozens of worlds, shaking his head in amazement. "These aren't disasters, they're just different planetary conditions. Most of these worlds would be perfectly habitable for humans with minimal equipment." The realization hit them all at once. Humanity hadn't just saved one world from an impossible plague. They had accidentally revealed themselves as the galaxy's ultimate problem solvers, beings who could casually walk through environments that would instantly kill any other known species. "I think we need to contact Earth Command," Captain Jinho said quietly, watching as yet another desperate request appeared on his screen. "We're not just explorers anymore. We've become the galaxy's emergency response team, and I don't think any of us were prepared for that responsibility." The Aurora's small crew had inadvertently become humanity's first ambassadors to a galaxy full of species who suddenly realized that the terrifying Deathworlders might actually be their salvation in times of crisis. 6 months after the Crystal Plague crisis, the Kalani homeworld had become something unique in galactic history, a planet where two completely different forms of life existed side by side. The northern continents remained pristine and sterile, exactly as the Kalani preferred, while the southern regions thrived with the chaotic, competitive ecosystem that humans had introduced. Dr. Heinwu walked through what the Kalani called the wild zones, areas where Earth bacteria had established permanent colonies. To him, it looked like a beautiful garden world with rich soil, diverse plant life, and the pleasant smell of healthy ecosystems. To the Kalani, these same areas were still considered dangerous contamination zones that required full protective gear to enter. "It's working perfectly," he reported to Captain Jinho via communicator. "The Kalani are growing food crops in the wild zones using remote-controlled equipment, and the yield is 3 times higher than anything they achieved in their sterile farms." The transformation hadn't been easy for the aliens to accept. Chief Researcher Velthor still wore his environmental suit every time he visited the restored areas, but he had to admit the results were undeniable. "Your Earth organisms," he told Dr. Hunwoo through his suit's filters. "They have created something we never understood was possible. Plants that grow without constant chemical treatment, soil that regenerates itself, air that cleans itself through biological processes. It's terrifying and wonderful at the same time." Meanwhile, back on the Aurora, Communications Officer Minji was processing the daily flood of emergency requests from across the galaxy. What had started as a simple rescue mission had evolved into something much bigger. "Captain, we have 17 new crisis calls today," she reported, scrolling through the messages. "The Altoni need help with a methane gas leak that's poisoning their atmosphere. The Viridian Collective is facing a deadly temperature spike to 60 degrees Celsius. And the Zephyrian Union wants assistance with what they're calling a catastrophic increase in atmospheric pressure." Captain Jinho no longer found these requests surprising. Over the past months, his crew had helped dozens of alien civilizations deal with environmental challenges that humans considered minor inconveniences. Each successful mission had further established humanity's reputation as the galaxy's ultimate survival specialists. The formal recognition came during a special session of the Galactic Council. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to witness something unprecedented: the official acknowledgement of a Deathworld species as essential members of galactic civilization. "The emergency response protocol is hereby established," announced Counselor Thexara, reading from the official declaration. When conventional galactic science fails to address environmental crises, human specialists will be authorized to implement solutions using their unique physiological capabilities and ecosystem management techniques. Lieutenant Soyoung, who had been promoted to lead the new Human Emergency Response Division, stood before the assembled aliens wearing nothing but her standard uniform. The sight of a human breathing normally in the council chambers, without any protective equipment, still made many delegates uncomfortable, but they could no longer deny the effectiveness of human intervention. "We accept this responsibility," she said simply, "but we want to make one thing clear. We're not trying to change your worlds to be like Earth. We're just helping you find balance in ways your species might not have considered." Engineer Dongyun had been busy establishing what humans called forward response stations throughout the galaxy, small outposts where human teams could be deployed quickly to crisis zones. Each station was staffed with specialists trained to handle the environmental challenges that routinely overwhelmed other species. The most remarkable change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity itself. The fear hadn't completely disappeared, but it had transformed into something closer to respectful awe. Humans were no longer seen as chaotic destroyers, but as beings who had mastered the art of thriving in impossible conditions. Captain Jinho stood on his bridge, watching as the latest crisis report appeared on his screen. A deadly volcanic eruption that was threatening a Nexari colony with temperatures reaching 200 degrees Celsius. "Set course for the Nexari system," he ordered, then turned to address his crew. "Looks like we have another impossible situation to make routine." As the Aurora jumped to hyperspace, heading toward another world that needed saving, Captain Jinho reflected on how much had changed. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as the species willing to walk into hell and make it habitable for everyone else. The galaxy had learned that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected source, those who called Deathworlds home and treated paradise as just another day at the office.